The homeless blind man wanted a storage unit full of junk he couldn't even see. He didn't want it. Didn't want the memories. Didn't want anything his dead brother left behind. But he took the key anyway, because sometimes survival means swallowing your pride and opening doors you swore you'd keep closed forever. What he found inside changed everything. Not the cash, not the ledger, not the evidence that would eventually bring down one of the most powerful men in the city. What changed everything was the dog. Thin, scarred, shaking, locked in the dark for 2 months, waiting for someone who was never coming back. The shelter said his name was Ezra. They said he'd been impossible to place, too shut down, too broken. But the moment they put the leash in Glenn's hand, the dog moved, not toward the light, not toward food or water or safety, toward the one thing in that storage unit his dead handler had trusted him to protect. And Glenn, who hadn't spoken to his brother in 7 years, who'd spent every day since the accident that stole his sight nursing a hatred so deep it had calcified into bone, realized something that made his hands shake and his throat close. Danny hadn't abandoned the dog. He'd hidden him, on purpose, with the only proof that could expose the truth. Because Danny knew, he knew he wasn't going to make it. And he knew the only one who'd finish what he started was the one who couldn't lie, couldn't be bought, couldn't be scared into silence. A dog trained to detect the one thing everyone else was trying to bury. Stay with us. Because this story will restore your faith in the bonds we think are broken beyond repair. Before we start, hit like and subscribe. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. But to understand how a blind man and a scarred dog became the last line of defense against a corruption that had gone unchecked for years, we need to go back to the beginning, to the night that tore 2 brothers apart. Glenn Ortiz woke to the sound of footsteps he'd memorized months ago. Sarah Martinez, caseworker. 3rd shift. She walked with a slight limp from an old knee injury, her shoes scuffing the linoleum in a rhythm he could track from 3 beds away. She wasn't supposed to be here this early. Glenn didn't move, didn't acknowledge her, just lay there on his assigned cot in the corner of the county shelter's men's wing, listening to the fluorescent lights hum overhead and the morning shift shuffling through their routines. He'd learned to make himself small in places like this. Invisible. The less space you took up, the fewer questions people asked. Glenn. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. We need to talk. He sat up slowly, reached for the white cane leaning against the wall. His fingers found the grip without hesitation. 7 years of practice had turned navigation into reflex, even if he still hated every second of it. What happened? He asked. Sarah pulled up a folding chair. The metal scraped against the floor. She sat down close enough that Glenn could smell her coffee. Too much cream, not enough sugar. Your brother died, she said. Glenn's hand tightened on the cane. He didn't ask which brother. He only had one. Had. Past tense. Danny. When? The word came out flat, mechanical. 2 months ago. Overdose. They found him in a motel room outside Riverside. 2 months. Danny had been dead for 2 months, and no one thought to tell him until now. Glenn didn't feel anything. That was the strangest part. No grief, no shock. Just a hollow kind of confirmation that the world worked exactly the way he'd always known it did. People left. People disappeared. People died. And the ones left behind just kept waking up in shelters, counting the hours until the next meal. Why are you telling me this now? Glenn asked. Sarah shifted in her chair. Because he left something. A storage unit. There's $800 in unpaid fees and the facility's about to auction it off in 48 hours. I thought you should know. Glenn almost laughed. Of course Danny left debts. That's all he ever left. I don't want it, Glenn said. You haven't even heard what's in it. I don't care what's in it. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward. Glenn could feel the shift in her posture, the way the air changed when someone was about to push. Glenn, listen to me. I know you and Danny weren't speaking. I know what happened. But this could be something. The manager said the unit's full of boxes, furniture, electronics. If there's anything in there you can sell, it could get you out of here. Into transitional housing. Maybe even your own place. Glenn shook his head. It's junk. Danny didn't own anything worth selling. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. Sarah stood. Her knee popped. I'm driving out there this afternoon to meet with the manager. You're coming with me. It wasn't a request. Glenn wanted to say no, wanted to tell her to leave him alone, to let Danny's garbage rot in some auction lot where it belonged. But Sarah had been the only caseworker in 3 years who actually remembered his name, who checked in when she didn't have to, who didn't treat him like a file number. He owed her at least this much. Fine, Glenn said. The drive took 40 minutes. Sarah described the route as they went, a habit she'd developed after realizing Glenn liked to build mental maps of places, strip malls, gas stations, a stretch of industrial buildings that smelled like rubber and diesel. Then the storage facility, a grid of orange units baking under a sun Glenn couldn't see but could feel on his arms through the open window. Sarah parked near the office. Glenn heard voices outside. Music. The crackle of a PA system. What's going on? He asked. Sarah cut the engine. Looks like some kind of event. Hold on. She got out. Glenn waited. A minute later, her door opened again. It's a service dog adoption thing, Sarah said. County shelter's doing a lottery. Free placement for people who can't afford the fees. Glenn's jaw tightened. I'm not interested. Glenn, I said I'm not interested. Sarah didn't move. You've been using that cane for 7 years. You hate it. I've watched you slam it into walls when you think no one's looking. I'm fine. You're not fine. And you don't have to be. There's a program that could actually help you. And it's happening right here, right now. Just put your name in. What's the worst that could happen? Glenn wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that he didn't need help, didn't need some dog following him around like a reminder of everything he'd lost. But exhaustion settled over him like a weight. He was tired, tired of fighting, tired of pretending the cane was enough. 1 entry, he said. Then we deal with the storage unit and we leave. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. Deal. She led him to a folding table where someone took his name and contact information. Glenn heard the rustle of paper, the scratch of a pen. Then they moved to a bench in the shade and waited. The PA system crackled. A woman's voice announced the winner. Glenn Ortiz. Glenn didn't react at first, didn't process it. Sarah grabbed his arm. That's you, she said. Glenn, that's you. He stood, let Sarah guide him toward the center of the lot. Someone was talking, explaining that the dog had been in the system for 6 months, that his previous handler had passed away unexpectedly, that he'd been difficult to place because he was shut down, unresponsive, possibly traumatized. His name's Ezra, the woman said. He's fully trained, but he's gonna need patience, and someone willing to work with him. Glenn felt the leash pressed into his hand, felt the weight of the dog on the other end. The animal didn't move, didn't pull, just stood there, silent and still. Thank you, Glenn said, because it seemed like the thing to say. Sarah drove them to the storage unit. Ezra sat in the back seat, quiet as stone. Glenn could hear the dog breathing. Slow, even, no panting, no whining, just breath. The manager met them at the unit. He unlocked the padlock and stepped back. It's all yours, he said. Sarah rolled the door up. The smell hit Glenn first. Mildew, dust. The stale air of a space that hadn't been opened in months. And then Ezra moved. The dog that had been silent and still for the past hour launched forward like he'd been shot from a cannon. The leash went taut in Glenn's hand. He stumbled, caught himself against the metal doorframe. Whoa, easy, Sarah said. But Ezra wasn't listening. His nails scraped against concrete as he bolted toward the back of the unit, pulling Glenn forward. The leash burned across Glenn's palm. He tightened his grip. What's he doing? Glenn asked. Sarah's footsteps followed. Hang on. He's pawing at something. Back corner, under a tarp. Glenn heard it. The frantic scrape of claws on fabric. A low whine building in the dog's throat. Not distress. Something else. Something urgent. Pull the tarp back, Glenn said. Sarah hesitated. Glenn, I don't think. Just do it. Fabric rustled. Then Sarah went quiet. What? Glenn asked. What is it? There's a bag. Duffel bag. It was hidden. Like, deliberately hidden. Glenn's chest tightened. Open it. More rustling. A zipper. Then silence that stretched too long. Sarah. It's money, she whispered. Glenn. It's a lot of money. Glenn's hand found the wall. He leaned against it, the concrete cool under his palm. His mind was racing, trying to piece together what this meant. Danny was dead, broke, living in motels. And now there was money hidden in a storage unit he'd abandoned. How much? Glenn asked. I don't know. Tens of thousands, maybe more. It's bundled in grocery bags. And there's something else underneath. A notebook, handwritten. Glenn heard her flip through pages. Ezra's whining had stopped. The dog was quiet now, but Glenn could feel the tension in the leash. The animal was waiting. What does it say? Glenn asked. Dates, names, dollar amounts. I don't recognize most of these, but some of them look like businesses, construction companies maybe. The numbers are huge. 50,000, 100,000 more. Glenn's throat went dry. This wasn't junk. This was evidence, or a record, or something Danny had been keeping that got him killed. We need to call the police, Sarah said. No. Glenn, no. Glenn pushed off the wall. We don't know what this is. Could be stolen. Could be part of something that'll disappear the second we hand it over. If we call the cops, it goes into an evidence locker, and I'm back at the shelter with nothing. If we don't call the cops, you could end up in jail. Glenn was quiet for a moment. He thought about the money, about what it could buy. A month in a motel, food that didn't come from a shelter kitchen, maybe even a deposit on a real apartment, but he also thought about Danny, about the brother who'd run a red light and destroyed both their lives in one night, the brother who'd vanished without a word, without an apology, without anything, and now Danny was dead and he'd left this. Give me 24 hours, Glenn said. Let me figure out what this is before we make a call we can't take back. Sarah didn't answer right away. Glenn heard her shift her weight, heard the bag being zipped closed. 24 hours, she said finally. But if this goes sideways, I'm reporting it. And you. Fair enough. They loaded the duffel into Sarah's car. Ezra jumped into the back seat without being told, his body pressed against the bag like he was guarding it. Glenn sat in front, the notebook in his lap. He ran his fingers over the pages. The handwriting was rough, uneven. He'd learned Braille years ago, but this was pen on paper. Useless to him. Back at the shelter, Glenn carried the duffel to his bunk. The common room was mostly empty. Dinner shift hadn't started yet. He shoved the bag under his cot, covered it with a blanket. Ezra sat beside it, rigid, watching. Glenn sat on the edge of the mattress. He pulled the notebook out and opened it, even though he couldn't read a word. His fingers traced the lines, feeling the indentations where the pen had pressed hard into the paper. Whoever wrote this had been in a hurry, or scared. Ezra moved. The dog's nose nudged Glenn's hand, not hard, just a gentle push. Glenn ignored it, kept running his fingers across the page. Ezra nudged again, this time harder. Glenn pulled his hand back. What? Glenn muttered. The dog whined, low and insistent. Then he moved Glenn's hand, physically moved it with his nose away from the notebook and toward the edge of the bed where the duffel sat. Glenn frowned. You want the bag? Ezra whined again. But when Glenn reached for the bag, the dog nudged his hand back to the notebook. Back and forth. Notebook, not the bag. Notebook. Glenn went still. The dog wasn't guarding the money. He was guarding the notebook, and he was trying to tell Glenn something he couldn't say, something he could only show. Glenn set the notebook on his lap. Ezra settled at his feet, his body pressed against the duffel. The dog's breathing slowed. Even. Calm. Like he'd finally done what he was supposed to do. Outside, the dinner bell rang. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Someone called Glenn's name, asking if he was coming to eat. Glenn didn't answer. Just sat there, holding a notebook he couldn't read, with a dog he'd known for 3 hours pressed against a bag full of money he didn't understand. And for the first time in 7 years, Glenn felt something other than bitterness. He felt afraid. Hours later, the lights went out. The shelter settled into its nightly rhythm of coughs and snores and whispered conversations. Glenn lay on his cot, staring at a ceiling he couldn't see. Ezra was still there, still pressed against the duffel, still guarding whatever Danny had left behind. Glenn's hand dropped over the side of the bed. His fingers found the dog's head. Ezra didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just let Glenn's hand rest there, warm and solid and real. Glenn closed his eyes. Sleep came slowly, and when it finally did, he dreamed of his brother for the first time in years. Glenn woke to the sound of his belongings being moved, not stolen, just shifted. His duffel bag was 2 inches to the left of where he'd placed it. The blanket he'd draped over it was folded differently. His white cane leaned against the wall at the wrong angle. Someone had been through his things. Glenn sat up slowly. His heart pounded against his ribs. The morning shift was already moving through the shelter. Footsteps. Voices. The clatter of breakfast trays being set out in the common room. Everything sounded normal. But nothing felt normal. Ezra was pressed against the duffel. The dog hadn't moved all night. Glenn reached under the cot. The bag was still there, still heavy. He unzipped it just enough to feel inside. Cash, notebook. Everything accounted for. He zipped it back up. A shelter supervisor walked past his bunk. Glenn called out to him. "Someone go through my stuff last night?" The supervisor stopped. "Routine inspection. We do them every couple weeks. You do them at 3 in the morning? Policy says we can inspect at any time. You got a problem with that. Take it up with administration." The supervisor kept walking. Glenn stayed on the edge of his cot, hands trembling. They'd searched his area. They knew something was here, and whoever they were, they'd be back. 2 hours later, a staff member found Glenn in the common room. She said someone was asking for him at the front desk. A visitor. Glenn didn't get visitors. "Who is it?" he asked. Didn't give a name. Just said he's a friend of your brother's. Glenn's chest tightened. Ezra's ears went up. The dog stood, positioning himself at Glenn's side as they moved toward the entrance. The leash was taut. The animal's body language had changed. Alert. Focused. Glenn heard the visitor before he smelled him. Expensive shoes on cheap linoleum. The faint scent of cologne. And a voice that sounded like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. "Mr. Ortiz? Glenn Ortiz?" "Yeah." A hand extended. Glenn felt the movement of air, heard the rustle of fabric. He didn't take it. The hand withdrew. "My name is Victor Landis. I'm a city councilman. I was a friend of your brother's. I'm so sorry for your loss." Glenn said nothing. Landis continued, unfazed. "I heard you claim Danny's storage unit yesterday. I wanted to reach out personally, make sure you're doing okay. I know this must be a difficult time." "How did you know I claimed the unit? Small city. Word travels. Especially when it involves someone I cared about." Glenn's hand tightened on Ezra's leash. The dog shifted beside him. Not aggressive, just present. Watchful. "What do you want?" Glenn asked. Landis's tone softened. Concerned, almost paternal. "I want to help. Danny was involved in some things before he died, things that might have left you in a complicated position. If you found anything in that unit, paperwork, files, money, I need you to understand that it's dangerous. For you, for anyone who gets involved." "Dangerous how?" "Danny made some mistakes. Got tangled up with people who don't forgive easily. If you're holding on to something that belongs to them, they'll come looking for it, and when they do, you won't be safe." Glenn felt Landis step closer. Just one step. But it was enough. Ezra's entire body went rigid. The hackles along his spine rose slowly, one hair at a time. His weight shifted forward onto his front legs, and a sound built in his chest, low, sustained, unmistakable. A growl that wasn't a warning. It was a statement. Glenn felt the leash pull as Ezra moved between him and Landis. The dog didn't lunge, didn't bark, just positioned himself like a wall, solid and immovable. Landis stopped moving. "That's quite a dog you've got there," he said. His voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but something underneath it had gone cold. "He doesn't like strangers," Glenn said. "I can see that." Landis took a step back. "Look, I don't want to scare you. I'm here as a friend. If you need help, if you want to hand over whatever Danny left behind, I can make sure it's dealt with properly. No questions asked, no police. Just a quiet transaction that keeps you safe." "I'll think about it." Landis pulled something from his pocket. A business card. He pressed it into Glenn's hand. "My number's on there. Call me anytime, day or night. I mean that." His footsteps retreated. The front door opened and closed. Glenn stood there, holding a card he couldn't read, with Ezra still pressed against his legs. The dog was shaking. Glenn found Sarah an hour later. She was in the administrative office, filling out paperwork. He told her about Landis, about the search, about the way Ezra had reacted. Sarah went quiet. "Read me the ledger," Glenn said, "all of it." They found a private corner in the common room. Sarah opened the notebook and started reading. Dates, names, dollar amounts. Some entries were simple. Others included notes in Danny's handwriting, rushed, barely legible. The dates spanned 18 months. The names were businesses, construction companies, city contractors, shell corporations Glenn had never heard of. The amounts were staggering. 50,000, 100,000, more. Sarah stopped reading. What? Glenn asked. I recognize some of these names. They've been in the news. City contracts, big deals, infrastructure projects. And they were all approved under Landis's oversight. He chairs the Municipal Development Committee. Glenn felt the air leave his lungs. Danny hadn't been stealing. He'd been documenting, building a case, keeping a record of something so big that it got him killed. And now Glenn had it. We need to get this to the police, Sarah whispered. No, not yet. Glenn pulled out his phone. He navigated to the recent calls, found the storage facility number, and hit dial. The manager answered on the third ring. Yeah, hi. This is Glenn Ortiz. I picked up my brother's unit yesterday, the one with the dog inside. Right. What can I do for you? The dog. Ezra. You said his handler died. Who was the handler? There was a pause, long enough that Glenn thought the line had dropped. Sir? The manager's voice came back, quieter now, uncertain. Daniel Ortiz, your brother. He registered the dog 6 months ago. Glenn hung up the phone. His hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. Danny had trained Ezra. Danny had registered the dog 6 months ago, which meant his brother hadn't been too far gone to care, hadn't been too lost in addiction to plan. Danny had known something was coming, and he'd prepared for it. Sarah was quiet beside him. Glenn could hear her breathing. Slow, controlled, like she was trying to keep herself calm. Why would Danny train a service dog? Glenn asked. He didn't need one, and where would he even get the money for that kind of training? I don't know, but we need to find out. Sarah pulled out her phone. Glenn listened to her navigate through websites, make calls, leave messages. It took 20 minutes before she found someone who could access Ezra's certification records. Another 10 before the information came through. Glenn, Sarah said quietly, Ezra's not just a service dog. He's trained in document and currency detection. Glenn's chest tightened. What does that mean? It means he's the kind of dog customs agents use, or the IRS. Dogs that can smell cash, detect specific types of paper, find hidden documents. This isn't basic service training. This is specialized work. Glenn thought about the way Ezra had gone straight to the duffel bag, the way he'd ignored the cash and kept pushing Glenn's hand toward the ledger. The dog hadn't been guarding money, he'd been guarding evidence. Danny was working maintenance jobs, Glenn said. Janitorial stuff. How would he afford training like that? He wouldn't, unless someone else paid for it. Sarah made more calls. She talked to the county animal services, then to the organization that had placed Ezra in the lottery. Finally, she found a number for someone who'd worked with Danny 2 years ago, a man named Rick Chen. He agreed to meet them, but only in public, and only if they came alone. They took a bus to the station on 4th Street. The afternoon sun was hot on Glenn's face. The air smelled like diesel and fried food from a nearby taco stand. Ezra walked close to Glenn's side, his body warm and steady. Rick Chen was waiting on a bench near the ticket counter. Sarah described him in a whisper. Mid-40s, nervous, kept looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to follow him. You're Danny's brother? Rick asked. Yeah. Rick was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry about what happened to him. He was a good guy, tried to do the right thing. What right thing? Glenn asked. Rick shifted on the bench. Look, I can't stay long, and if anyone asks, we never talked, but Danny deserves better than what he got, so I'll tell you when I know. He explained that Danny had been working for a city contractor 2 years ago, cleaning offices after hours. It was grunt work, but Danny showed up on time and kept his head down. Then, one night, he found something in a trash can. Receipts, documents that didn't match the work being billed to the city. Danny should have thrown them away, should have kept quiet. But he didn't. He started keeping copies, taking photos, building a file. And when he had enough, he reached out to a federal investigator who'd been looking into municipal corruption. The investigator told Danny to keep gathering evidence, said they'd protect him, said this could bring down the whole operation. Then the investigator disappeared, Rick said. Just stopped answering calls. And a week later, Danny's apartment got broken into. Nothing was stolen, but everything was searched. Danny knew what that meant. Glenn's throat went dry. What did he do? He got smart. He rented a storage unit under a fake name, found a guy who trained detection dogs and paid him cash to work with Ezra. Danny figured if something happened to him, the dog would know where the evidence was, would protect it, would lead it to someone who could finish what he started. Sarah leaned forward. Who was the investigator? Do you have a name? Rick shook his head. Danny never told me, said it was safer if I didn't know. But whoever it was, they either got bought off or got scared. Either way, Danny was on his own. And Landis? Glenn asked. Rick went very still. How do you know that name? He showed up at the shelter this morning, tried to get me to hand over whatever Danny left behind. Rick stood up fast. You need to get out of here, right now. If Landis knows you have the ledger, you're not safe. Danny's co-worker in accounting? Dead. Car accident 3 months ago. The guy who helped Danny set up the storage unit? Overdose last month? Everyone who knew what Danny was doing is gone. Glenn's hands were shaking again. What was Danny documenting? A laundering scheme. City funds getting funneled through fake contracts, then kicked back to Landis and his people. Millions of dollars. And Danny had it all written down. Every transaction, every name, every dollar. Rick backed away from the bench. I have to go. Don't contact me again. And if you're smart, you'll burn that ledger and forget you ever found it. He disappeared into the crowd before Glenn could say anything else. They took the bus back to the shelter. Glenn sat with Ezra pressed against his leg, thinking about his brother, about Danny finding those documents in a trash can, about Danny deciding to do something instead of walking away, about Danny training a dog to protect evidence he knew might get him killed. Glenn had spent 7 years hating Danny, 7 years nursing a wound that felt too deep to heal. But maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the brother who'd caused the accident wasn't the same brother who died in that motel room. Maybe Danny had been trying to fix things, and maybe the dog was proof. Sarah's phone rang. She answered it, then went quiet. Glenn heard her breathing change, heard the tension in her silence. What? Glenn asked. Sarah's voice was tight. That was the shelter. 2 men just showed up asking for you. They're claiming to be federal agents. Sarah didn't go back to the shelter. She flagged down a cab 3 blocks away and gave the driver an address Glenn didn't recognize. They rode in silence. Glenn's hands were shaking. Ezra sat pressed against his leg, tense and alert. Where are we going? Glenn asked. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't think to look. The cab stopped 15 minutes later. Sarah paid the driver and led Glenn up a set of concrete steps. The air smelled like old wood and candle wax. A door opened. Hinges creaked. Then they were inside. St. Michael's, Sarah said. I coordinate food services here twice a week. The basement has a kitchenette and a cot. No one uses it at night. She locked the door behind them, led Glenn down a narrow staircase. The temperature dropped with each step. The basement was cool and damp, the kind of space that never quite dried out. Glenn heard water dripping somewhere in the distance. Sarah helped him sit on the cot. Ezra circled the room once, then settled at Glenn's feet. The dog's breathing was fast, shallow. They're not real agents, Sarah said. I called the shelter back, asked for badge numbers. They didn't have any. Just said they'd return tomorrow. Glenn's chest tightened. We need to go to the FBI. The real FBI. Right now. And tell them what? That you found cash and a ledger in your dead brother's storage unit? That a city councilman asked you to hand it over? They'll take the evidence and send you back to the shelter. And if Landis has people inside the police department, who's to say he doesn't have reach higher? So what do we do? Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she pulled out her phone. I know someone. A journalism professor I had in college, Martin Cross. He's been investigating municipal corruption for years. If anyone can verify what's in that ledger, it's him. She made the call. Glenn listened to her explain the situation in careful, measured terms. Martin asked questions. Sarah answered. Finally, she hung up. He'll meet us tomorrow afternoon. But he needs time to cross-reference the ledger entries with public records. He says it could take days. I don't have days. I know. Glenn stood. Paced to the wall and back, His cane tapped against the concrete floor. Ezra followed him, staying close. Landis knows I have the ledger, Glenn said. He sent people to find me. They'll keep looking, and when they find me, they won't. You don't know that. Sarah's voice was firm. No one knows about this place except me and the parish priest, and Father Miguel doesn't ask questions. You're safe here, for now. Glenn wanted to believe her, but safety felt like a concept from another life, something he'd lost 7 years ago in a hospital bed with bandages over his eyes. He sat back down on the cot. Ezra pressed against his leg. The dog was trembling. Night came slowly. Sarah left to get food and supplies. Glenn sat in the dark, listening to the building settle around him, the drip of water, the hum of a furnace kicking on somewhere above, the sound of Ezra's breathing. Except the dog wasn't breathing normally anymore. Glenn heard him stand, heard his nails click across the floor, back and forth, from the cot to the door, from the door to the duffel bag Sarah had left in the corner. Over and over. The pacing was relentless, anxious. Ezra, lie down. The dog didn't listen. He kept moving, kept circling. Then he stopped at the duffel and whined, low and sustained, not a request, a demand. Glenn stood, walked to where the sound was coming from. His hands found the bag. Ezra's nose pushed against it, insistent. I know, Glenn whispered. I know you want to protect it. But the dog whined again, louder this time. And Glenn realized something that made his throat close. Ezra wasn't trying to protect the ledger. He was trying to finish what Danny had started. He'd been locked in that storage unit for 2 months, waiting, guarding. And now someone had finally found him. Someone who could move, who could act, who could take the evidence where it needed to go. But Glenn wasn't doing that. He was hiding, running, waiting for someone else to solve the problem. The dog knew it, and he wouldn't let it stand. Glenn sat down on the floor beside the duffel. Ezra settled next to him, his body warm and solid. For a long time, neither of them moved. Glenn just sat there in the dark, thinking about his brother, about Danny finding documents in a trash can and deciding to do something, about Danny training a dog to protect evidence because he knew he might not survive long enough to use it himself. Danny had been terrified, alone, probably high most of the time, trying to numb the fear. But he kept going, kept gathering proof, kept fighting. And now Glenn had a choice. He could stay hidden in a church basement, waiting for a journalist to verify what he already knew was true. Or he could do what Danny would have done, what Danny had trusted someone would do. He could finish it. Sarah returned an hour later with sandwiches and water. Glenn was sitting on the cot, the duffel in his lap. Ezra was calm now, watchful. I need your phone, Glenn said. Why? I'm going to call Landis. Sarah went very still. That's insane. He wants the ledger. He's willing to come out in the open to get it, so I'm going to give him the chance. I'll set up a meeting, somewhere public, and I'll record everything he says. Glenn, he's not going to admit anything. He's too smart for that. Maybe. But Ezra will be there. And if Landis is carrying anything he shouldn't be, the dog will know. Sarah didn't say anything for a long time. Then she handed Glenn her phone. Glenn navigated to the contacts, found Landis's number from the business card he'd kept, hit dial. The phone rang twice. Then a voice answered, smooth, professional. Landis campaign office. This is Glenn Ortiz. I need to speak with Victor Landis. Tell him I'm ready to talk about what my brother left behind. The next afternoon, Sarah drove Glenn to Riverside Park. The air was warm, thick with the smell of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke from somewhere nearby. Glenn heard children playing, a dog barking in the distance, the normal sounds of a Saturday that felt anything but normal. Sarah guided him to a picnic table under a tree. The shade was cool on Glenn's face. She pressed her phone into his jacket pocket, already recording. He's here, she whispered. Glenn heard footsteps approaching. 2 sets, one heavy, confident, the other lighter, following half a step behind. The heavy footsteps stopped at the table. Glenn, thank you for reaching out. Landis's voice was warm, concerned, like they were old friends meeting for coffee. I wasn't sure you would, Landis continued, but I'm glad you did. This is Marcus, my aide. He's here to help facilitate things, make sure we're both protected. Glenn didn't respond, just sat there, hands folded on the table, feeling the weight of the phone in his pocket. Landis sat down across from him. Glenn heard the bench creak under his weight, heard him shift, getting comfortable, setting something on the ground beside the table. I know this has been overwhelming, Landis said. Finding out about Danny, dealing with what he left behind. You've been through enough, Glenn, more than anyone should have to endure. You said Danny was involved in something dangerous. He was, and I tried to help him, tried to steer him away from it. But Danny made choices I couldn't control. Glenn's jaw tightened. What kind of choices? The kind that get people hurt, the kind that involve people who don't forgive easily. Landis paused. What did you find in that storage unit, Glenn? Why don't you tell me what you think I found? Landis was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. Still warm, but more carefully measured. I think you found something that Danny wanted, kept hidden, and I think holding on to it puts you in danger. From who? From people who want it back. Glenn leaned forward slightly. Are you one of those people? Landis laughed. Soft, practiced. No, I'm trying to help you. That's why I'm here. I want to make this simple, clean. I'll give you $10,000 cash for whatever's in that duffel bag. No questions asked, no police, no complications. You take the money and get yourself out of that shelter. Start fresh. And whatever Danny was involved in dies with him. Glenn felt Sarah shift beside him. Her breathing had gone shallow. 10,000, Glenn said. Yes, more than fair, considering you have no idea what you're holding or what it's worth. And if I say no? Landis's voice stayed calm. Then you're on your own. And the people looking for that bag won't be as generous as I am. Glenn's fingers found the edge of the table. He gripped it. What's in the bag that's worth $10,000? I don't know. I'm not asking to know. I'm offering you a way out. Out of what? Out of whatever mess Danny left you in. The conversation was going nowhere. Landis wasn't admitting anything, wasn't naming the ledger, the money, the scheme. Every answer was vague, deniable, designed to sound helpful while saying nothing at all. Glenn tried a different angle. You knew Danny well? Well enough to know he was troubled. Well enough to wish I could have done more. Did you know he trained a dog? Landis paused. Just for a second. I didn't. His name's Ezra. He's with me now. Service dog. That's good. You deserve support. Glenn heard Ezra shift at his feet. The dog had been quiet since they arrived, lying in the shade beneath the table. But now he stood. Glenn felt the leash go taut. Ezra, stay, Glenn said. But the dog didn't listen. His nails clicked across the concrete, moving away from Glenn, moving towards something else. Sarah's voice was tight. Glenn, what's he doing? Glenn asked. He's going to Landis's briefcase, the one on the ground. Glenn heard Ezra stop, heard the dog's breathing change, slow, controlled, and then nothing, just silence. What's happening? Glenn asked. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He's sitting, right next to the briefcase. Perfect posture. Staring at it. Glenn's chest tightened. That was an alert. The exact position a detection dog uses when they find what they're trained to find. Landis stood up fast. The bench scraped against concrete. I should go, Landis said. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone. Think about my offer, Glenn. You've got 24 hours. After that, I can't help you. Your dog seems interested in my briefcase, Landis added. You might want to work on his training. Footsteps moved away. Quick, purposeful. Glenn heard a car door open and close. An engine started, then silence. Sarah pulled the phone out of Glenn's pocket, stopped the recording, played it back. Glenn listened to his own voice asking questions, listened to Landis deflecting everyone. There was nothing incriminating, nothing concrete, just a conversation between two people discussing a hypothetical problem. It's useless, Sarah said. But Ezra wasn't. Sarah was quiet. He alerted on the briefcase. Full detection posture. I've seen drug dogs work before. That's exactly what they do when they find something. Glenn called Ezra back. The dog returned to his side, calm now. Mission complete. Landis is carrying something, Glenn said. Cash or documents, something connected to what's in the ledger, and he brought it here to a meeting in a public park. Why would he do that? Because he's confident. He thinks he's untouchable. Glenn stood. His legs were shaking, but his voice was steady. Get the ledger to your journalist, now. Not tomorrow, not tonight. Right now, Glenn. We're out of time, Landis knows I'm not going to take his offer, which means he's going to come for it another way. And when he does, the ledger needs to be somewhere he can't reach it. 18 hours later, Glenn sat in Martin Cross's apartment while the journalist worked through the ledger page by page. The room smelled like old books and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Glenn could hear Martin's fingers tapping on a keyboard. Stopping, starting again. The rhythm of someone cross-referencing information that shouldn't exist. Sarah had dropped the ledger off that afternoon and stayed to help. She read entries aloud while Martin searched public records, contract databases, campaign finance reports, looking for matches, looking for proof. This one, Martin said, Apex Construction, awarded a $1 million city contract for road repair in March 2023. The ledger shows $100,000 kicked back to a shell company 2 weeks later. Can you prove the shell company is connected to Landis? Sarah asked. Not yet, but the timing matches. And 3 other entries followed the same pattern. City awards contract. Money flows through a shell. Shell makes a donation to Landis's campaign a month later? It's laundering, clean as day. Glenn sat on the couch with Ezra pressed against his leg. The dog had been quiet all evening, watchful. Is it enough? Martin was quiet for a moment. It's enough to prosecute, but it's not enough to go public. Not without corroboration. If I run this story and Landis denies it, his lawyers will bury me. I need someone inside the system to confirm the ledger matches actual discrepancies. You have someone? Sarah asked. Maybe. Deputy City Auditor, Rebecca Huang. She's been flagging irregular contracts for months, getting stonewalled at every turn. If she sees this ledger and confirms it matches her findings, we've got him. Will she go on record? I don't know, but I'm meeting her tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Glenn felt something shift in his chest. Hope, fragile and dangerous. What do we do until then? You stay out of sight. Let me handle this. If Landis finds out we're about to blow this open, a sound cut through the apartment. Loud, sharp. Wood splintering, the church basement door. Glenn was on his feet before he understood what was happening. Ezra's body went rigid beside him. A low growl built in the dog's throat. Glenn? Sarah's voice was tight with panic. That's not the basement, Glenn said. Someone's breaking into the basement. Martin's chair scraped back. Call 911. But there wasn't time. Footsteps pounded down the stairs. Heavy, fast, 2 sets. Glenn heard them hit the bottom and turned toward the room where he'd been sleeping. Glenn grabbed Ezra's leash. Sarah, where's the alarm? Kitchen. On the wall by the back door. Glenn moved. His cane swept the floor in front of him. Left, right. Mapping the space, he found the doorway. Found the kitchen. His hand swept the wall. Found the panel. Behind him, he heard the men reach the room. Heard them start tearing through his things, ripping, smashing, looking for the ledger that wasn't there. Glenn's fingers found the alarm button. He pressed it. A siren split the air. Loud enough to wake the entire block, one of the men shouted. Footsteps moved back toward the stairs, but the other one kept coming, toward the kitchen, toward Glenn. Where is it? The man snapped. Glenn didn't answer. His hand tightened on Ezra's leash. The man grabbed Glenn's arm, hard. I asked you a question. Ezra didn't growl, didn't bark, just moved. Fast and precise. Glenn heard the snap of jaws on fabric, heard the man scream. The grip on Glenn's arm released. Ezra wasn't attacking wildly. He was trained, going for the arm. Then the leg. Creating distance. Creating space for Glenn to move. Glenn stumbled back, hit the counter. The man was cursing, trying to kick the dog off. But Ezra held on, unshakable. Sarah's voice came from somewhere behind Glenn. He's running. The other one's running. The church alarm was still blaring. The man Ezra had grabbed finally broke free. Glenn heard him crash into furniture. Heard him hit the stairs. Then both sets of footsteps were pounding up. Gone. Ezra returned to Glenn's side. His breathing was fast, but controlled. Glenn's hand found the dog's head. The fur was warm, solid. You okay? Sarah asked. Glenn nodded. He didn't trust his voice. Police arrived 6 minutes later. Glenn told them what happened. 2 men, forced entry, demanded something he didn't have. He didn't mention the ledger, didn't mention Landis, Just said they were looking for money they thought his dead brother had hidden. The officers took notes. Asked if Glenn wanted to press charges. Glenn said yes. They said they'd file a report, dust for prints, but without a description or identification, there wasn't much they could do. After they left, Martin looked at the wreckage in the basement. Glenn's belongings were destroyed. His cot was overturned. His bag was ripped open. Everything scattered. They were looking for the ledger, Martin said quietly. Yeah, which means Landis knows you didn't take his offer, and he knows you're not going to walk away. Glenn sat on the steps. His hands were still shaking. Ezra pressed against his leg. How long until you meet with the auditor? 8 hours. Will she help? I don't know. She's scared. Everyone who's tried to question these contracts has either been fired or transferred. But if she sees the ledger, if she knows there's proof, Martin's phone rang. He answered it, listened, then hung up. That was Rebecca. She's willing to meet. Tomorrow 9 a.m., her office at the Federal Building. Sarah let out a breath. The Federal Building, that's good. Public, safe. Glenn stood. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself upright. Get the ledger to her, whatever it takes, because if Landis sent people here once, he'll send them again. Morning came slowly. Glenn hadn't slept, just sat in the church basement with Ezra, listening to the buildings settle around him. Sarah had stayed too, curled up in a chair in the adjacent room. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Martin's call came at 8:30. Glenn answered on the second ring. She's at her office. Waiting for us, she's terrified, Glenn. But she's willing to look at the ledger. And if it matches what she's been tracking, then she'll go on record. And we've got him. Glenn closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he let himself believe it might actually be over. The Federal Building smelled like floor polish and recycled air. Glenn sat on a bench in the hallway with Ezra pressed against his leg, listening to voices drift through the closed door of Rebecca Huang's office. Martin was in there. Sarah, too, presenting the ledger to the one person who might be able to confirm what Danny had died trying to prove. Glenn's cane rested across his knees. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. The door opened. Sarah's footsteps moved toward him. She's looking at it now, Sarah whispered. She hasn't said anything yet, just keeps cross-referencing entries with files on her computer. Glenn nodded. He couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but wait. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Glenn heard papers shuffling, heard Rebecca's chair roll across the floor, heard her pick up the phone and set it back down without calling anyone. Finally, the door opened again. Martin stepped into the hallway. She confirmed it, he said quietly. Every entry in the ledger matches discrepancies she's been flagging for months. Shell companies, kickbacks, contracts awarded to businesses that barely exist. She's been trying to get someone to listen, but every time she raised concerns, she was told to drop it. Will she go on record? Glenn asked. She's terrified. She was warned twice to stop asking questions. The last person who questioned these contracts was transferred to a department that doesn't exist anymore. Glenn's throat went tight. So she won't help. I didn't say that. Martin sat down beside him. She kept copies of everything, every flagged contract, every email telling her to stand down. Combined with Danny's ledger, it's enough to trigger a federal investigation. But she can't just hand it over to a journalist or a homeless guy with no standing. She needs to enter it through proper channels. What does that mean? She's calling the FBI, Financial Crimes Unit, someone she trusts. If they take possession of the ledger and her files, Landis can't bury it. Glenn let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Rebecca stepped into the hallway. Her voice was quiet but steady. I made the call. They're sending someone, should be here within the hour. Thank you, Glenn said. Don't thank me yet. If Landis finds out what's happening, he'll do everything he can to stop it. She went back into her office. Glenn heard her lock the door. An hour passed. Then another. Glenn stayed on the bench, listening to the building move around him. Footsteps, voices, elevators opening and closing. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Then Ezra stood. The dog's ears went forward. His body went rigid. Glenn felt the leash pull tight. What is it? Glenn asked. Sarah's voice came from beside him. I don't know. He's staring down the hallway. Glenn heard footsteps approaching. Expensive shoes on marble. 2 sets, one confident, one hesitant, and a voice that made Glenn's blood go cold. "I wasn't expecting to see you here, Glenn." "Landis." Glenn stood slowly. His hand tightened on Ezra's leash. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, just stood there, focused on something Glenn couldn't see. "What are you doing here?" Glenn asked. Landis's voice was calm. "Practiced. I'm here voluntarily. Heard there were some questions about city contracts. Thought I'd clear things up before rumors got out of hand. This is my attorney, David Chen." Sarah stepped closer to Glenn. "How did you know we were here?" "Word travels, especially when it involves baseless accusations against a public servant." Landis moved closer. Glenn could smell his cologne, could feel the air shift as he stopped a few feet away. "I heard you've been through a difficult time," Landis said. His voice had that same false warmth it always had. "If there's anything I can do to help." Ezra moved, not toward Landis. Toward the briefcase Glenn could hear him carrying. The dog walked forward 3 steps, stopped directly beside it, and sat. Perfect posture, tail down, eyes locked, breathing slow and controlled. Glenn knew that position, had heard Sarah describe it in the park. It was an alert, the kind detection dogs give when they find exactly what they're trained to find. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Glenn, he's alerting." Landis went very still. A security guard who'd been standing nearby moved forward. "Sir, is there a problem?" "No problem," Landis said quickly. "Just a confused dog." But Ezra didn't move, didn't break position, just sat there beside the briefcase, silent and certain. The guard looked at the dog, looked at Landis. "Sir, I'm going to need you to open that briefcase." "This is ridiculous. I'm here voluntarily. I don't have to." "Federal building, sir. During an active investigation. If the dog's indicating contraband or evidence, I need to verify there's nothing inappropriate in your possession." Landis's attorney stepped forward. "My client has rights. You can't search without probable cause." Detection dog alert is probable cause. The guard called for backup. 2 more officers arrived within minutes. Landis stood there, briefcase in hand, his charm finally starting to crack. "This is harassment," he said. "I came here in good faith." "Then you won't mind opening the briefcase." Landis set it on the floor, opened it slowly. The guard looked inside. His expression changed. "What is that?" Sarah whispered. The guard pulled out a stack of documents, held them up to the light. "Ledgers, financial records, cash." He looked at Landis. "Sir, you're carrying undeclared cash and documents into a federal building during an investigation into financial crimes. I need you to come with me." Landis's attorney tried to intervene, started citing regulations, threatening lawsuits. But the guards weren't listening. They escorted Landis toward a security office. Glenn heard his footsteps retreat, heard his voice getting smaller, angrier. Then silence. Rebecca's door opened. She stepped into the hallway with Martin. "What just happened?" Sarah's voice was shaking. Ezra alerted on Landis's briefcase. He was carrying evidence. Right here, right now. Rebecca's breath caught. "The FBI is on their way. They'll want to see that briefcase. And they'll want the ledger." She looked at Glenn. "Your brother trained that dog well." Glenn's hand found Ezra's head. The dog leaned into his touch. Mission complete. 30 minutes later, 2 agents from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit arrived. They took possession of the ledger, Rebecca's files, and the contents of Landis's briefcase. They interviewed Rebecca, interviewed Martin, asked Glenn to provide a statement about how he'd acquired the ledger and what he knew about his brother's activities. Glenn told them everything. When it was over, one of the agents pulled Glenn aside. "Your brother was building a case. He had help from an investigator who went missing 18 months ago. We never found out what happened to him. But this ledger might finally give us answers." Glenn nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. The agents left. Glenn, Sarah, and Martin stood in the hallway, exhausted and shaking. Through the glass doors at the end of the hall, Glenn heard a commotion. Voices. Cameras. The press had arrived. Martin's phone buzzed. He checked it. Landis just released a statement. Says this is a political hit job, that he's the victim of a conspiracy. "Is he?" Glenn asked. "Not anymore." Martin looked at the ledger in the agent's hands. Not with that evidence, not with Rebecca's testimony, and not with a detection dog that just proved he was carrying undeclared cash into a federal building. Sarah touched Glenn's arm. You did it. Danny did it. It's over. But Glenn didn't feel relief, just exhaustion, and a strange kind of grief for the brother he'd spent 7 years hating. The brother who'd been trying to make things right, who'd trusted a dog to finish what he couldn't. Ezra pressed against Glenn's leg. Warm, steady, still guarding, still protecting, still keeping the promise Danny had made. 6 months later, Glenn woke up in his own bed for the first time in 8 years. Not a cot in a shelter, not a church basement, his own apartment. Small, 1 bedroom, but his. The county had placed him in permanent supportive housing after everything came out. Sarah had made sure the right people knew what he'd done, what he'd risked, what Danny had left behind. Glenn sat up. His hand found the nightstand, found his phone. 7:30 in the morning. He had a shift at the radio station in 2 hours. Part-time work using the sound engineering skills he thought he'd lost forever. The station manager had heard his story, offered him a chance. Glenn took it. Ezra stirred at the foot of the bed. The dog stretched, yawned, then moved to Glenn's side, pressing his nose against Glenn's hand. Morning ritual. 7 months together now. The county had officially recertified Ezra as Glenn's service dog, waived all the fees, made it permanent. Glenn dressed, made coffee, let Ezra out into the small courtyard behind the building. The morning was cool, quiet. Glenn could hear birds, traffic in the distance, the hum of the city waking up. He thought about the news he'd heard yesterday. Victor Landis had been indicted on 14 counts of fraud, money laundering, and corruption. The investigation had expanded far beyond what Danny had documented. Years of schemes, millions of dollars. Rebecca Huang was working with federal prosecutors. Martin Cross's expose had run in 3 major outlets. The whole city knew now. Glenn's name had been kept out of the press. That was his choice. But Sarah had made sure the people who mattered knew. The county, the station, the community that had taken him in. Today, Glenn was going to do something he'd avoided for 7 years. He was going to visit Danny's grave. The cemetery was 20 minutes away by bus. Glenn and Ezra rode in silence. The dog sat at Glenn's feet, calm and steady. When they arrived, Glenn used his cane to navigate the paths. He'd called ahead, asked for directions. The groundskeeper met him at the entrance and walked him to the plot. Section 100, row 12, 3rd marker from the path. Glenn thanked him, waited until the footsteps retreated. Then he stood there, alone with Ezra and the brother he hadn't spoken to in 7 years. The grass was soft under his feet. The air smelled like rain. Glenn's hand tightened on his cane. I don't know if you can hear me, Glenn said quietly. I don't know if any of this matters, but I needed to come. Ezra sat beside him, silent, waiting. I hated you for a long time, for what you did, for leaving, for taking everything and giving nothing back. Glenn's voice cracked. But you did give something back. You gave me Ezra. You gave me the ledger. You gave me a way to finish what you started. The wind picked up. Leaves rustled somewhere behind him. Landis is going to prison. The investigation found everything. Everyone who helped him. Everyone who looked the other way. Rebecca says the trial starts in 3 months. They're calling it the biggest corruption case the city's seen in decades. Glenn knelt. His hand found the grass, found the edge of the stone marker. I wish you'd told me. Wish you'd trusted me enough to ask for help. But I get why you didn't. I wasn't listening, wasn't there. I was too angry to see that you were trying. His throat closed. He sat there in the grass, one hand on the marker, the other on Ezra's back. You trained him well. He knew exactly what to do, exactly where to go. He kept the ledger safe for 2 months, waiting. And when I found him, he didn't give up. He kept pushing until I understood. Glenn's hand moved to Ezra's head. The dog leaned into his touch. Thank you for trusting the dog to find someone who'd finish it, for believing there was still something worth saving. Glenn stood slowly. His cane tapped the ground. Ezra rose with him. I forgive you. For the accident. For leaving. For all of it. I hope you found some peace. I hope you knew, at the end, that what you did mattered. They walked back toward the path. Glenn's cane swept left and right. Ezra stayed close. The leash was slack between them. A woman's voice called out from behind. "Excuse me?" Glenn stopped, turned toward the sound. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said. "But is that Ezra, the dog from the news?" Glenn hesitated. "Yeah, that's him. I read about what happened, about the federal building, about how he alerted on that politician's briefcase." Her voice was warm, curious. "Is he really the dog who brought down Victor Landis?" Glenn smiled. It was the first time he'd smiled in months. "No," he said. "He's the dog who kept a promise." The woman thanked him, walked away. Glenn stood there for a moment, listening to her footsteps fade. Then he and Ezra started walking, back toward the bus stop, back toward home. The leash was slack. Glenn's cane tapped the sidewalk in a steady rhythm. And for the first time in 7 years, Glenn wasn't walking alone. He had a job. He had a home. He had a dog who'd saved his life by refusing to give up on a mission his brother had trusted him to complete. Danny was gone. But what he'd left behind wasn't junk. It was justice. It was redemption. It was proof that even broken people could find a way to make things right. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance wasn't what they left. It was who they trusted to deliver it.